who's the General Manager, Education and Community Services for Family Planning Queensland. Beth Allen, who's the Assistant Director, Child Protection Unit, Statutory and Forensic Design Branch of the Department of Health and Human Services. Caroline Worth, who's the Manager, South Eastern Centre Against Sexual Assault. And Dale Tolliday, who's the Clinical Advisor, New Street Adolescent Service Program with New South Wales Health. Good morning. So perhaps if your Honour wishes to swear in the witnesses, if Ms Brennan can...
Ms Brennan, do you wish to take the oath or the affirmation for the purposes of giving evidence?
The affirmation, thanks.
All right, thank you. Could you repeat after me, please? I do solemnly...
I do solemnly...
Sincerely and truly...
Sincerely and truly...
Declare and affirm...
Declare and affirm...
That the evidence I shall give...
That the evidence I shall give...
In this Royal Commission...
In this Royal Commission...
Shall be the truth...
Shall be the truth...
The whole truth...
The whole truth...
And nothing but the truth...
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. You can take a seat again. Ms Allen. Wish to take the affirmation?
Affirmation,
thank you. Could you repeat after me, please? I do solemnly...
I do solemnly...
Sincerely and truly...
Sincerely and truly...
Declare and affirm...
Declare and affirm...
That the evidence I shall give...
That the evidence I shall give...
In this Royal Commission...
In this Royal Commission...
Shall be the truth...
Shall be the truth...
The whole truth...
The whole truth...
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Ms Allen. Ms Worth.
Affirm, please.
Would you repeat after me? I do solemnly...
I do solemnly...
Sincerely and truly...
Sincerely and truly...
Declare and affirm...
Declare and affirm...
That the evidence I shall give...
That the evidence I shall give...
In this Royal Commission...
In this Royal Commission...
Shall be the truth...
Shall be the truth...
The whole truth...
The whole truth...
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And Mr Tolliday.
I'll take an oath.
Could you raise the Bible, please? There should be one there on the bench. And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
Swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
In this Royal Commission.
In this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Replace the Bible and take a seat, please.
Thank you, Your Honour. If I can start with you, Ms Brennan, you work for Family Planning Queensland.
That's correct.
What functions do Family Planning Queensland have in relation to children in out-of-home care?
Yeah, so in relation to children with out-of-home care, we provide sexuality education, and we also provide a service that's a sexual assault service. So within both of those things, we work with children with regards to sexuality, problem and abusive sexual behaviours, and are also working on the area of prevention of sexual abuse and exploitation.
When you say you work with children, how do you obtain access to the children in out-of-home care in order to do that work?
So we sometimes work directly with children in out-of-home care. So that might be through the department or through the organisations that actually support children in out-of-home care. So they might be in residentials or in foster and kinship care situations.
So just let me stop you there. So am I correct in understanding that those responsible for delivering the services or looking after the children would contact your department in order to seek the services you offer in respect of individual children?
Yes, so sometimes they would contact us in respect to individual children, sometimes in respect to group work with children. A lot of the work that we do is also with professionals. So we also train professionals who work with children and young people in out-of-home care, and we also do work with foster and kinship carers.
And with the work with foster and kinship carers, that work comes to you through the department or non-government organisation responsible for selecting the carers. Is that right?
Yes, so sometimes it'll come through the department or through the organisations who support those people. Sometimes foster and kinship carers will contact us directly themselves, and then also sometimes it will be through schools.
Do you charge for your services?
We have a variety of responses. So for our sexual assault service, that also does child and family support. No, that's a free service. Our other services are fee for service, unless we get funding. So every so often we would get a specific project, and we may be able to work with particular groups for free. But most of this work is fee for service.
With the foster carers who come to you directly, who funds the training you provide them?
So it depends on how they came to us. If they came to us through the department or through their organisation, hopefully those organisations will pay the fees. Sometimes foster and kinship carers actually pay themselves.
So if they come directly, they pay themselves, as far as you understand it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have waiting lists for your services which are fee for service?
What we did a few years ago is we tried to actually close those services because the waiting list was so large, and we felt that we weren't able to respond in the best way. We've just started again, and a waiting list has started almost immediately.
To some people, that would seem perverse.
Yes.
If there was a long waiting list to close rather than to either seek to expand or see the ones you can.
What we did was an advocacy support program where we actually put our energies into working with the department and looking at supporting in a more holistic way the work that should be being done with foster and kinship carers and with workers and with children and young people in care. Sometimes seeing somebody one-on-one who's in crisis isn't really, from our practice, the way that we feel is best to support people.
Is there somebody, the foster carer or kinship carer, or the child? When you say sometimes seeing somebody one-on-one.
Yes, so we would sometimes work with an individual child or young person. Sometimes we would work with a foster or kinship carer. Sometimes we would work with those people in a group. Yeah. So, I mean, we would continue to do phone support and obviously never leave someone who's in crisis. But actually, we're an organisation that tries to be proactive and preventative with regards to this space. And if children and young people and services are sending us people in crisis, actually there's a lot more that can be done around that work. And so that's why we moved into trying to establish better practices within services. You know, when we're not funded for this service and when people don't actually really genuinely have the money to pay themselves, it's quite difficult to be able to maintain it.
Are you funded by the department with community child protection responsibilities?
So our sexual assault service, which is only based in Cairns, is funded through the Department of Communities with the responsibility for child safety. Our education services and our clinical services are mostly funded through the Department of Health.
You have a close relationship with the Department of Communities, which has the child protection responsibilities?
Yes, I'd say we do.
And when they refer children to you, the referral of children who need one or more of your services comes with an expectation that you'll pay for that out of the funding that you receive from one or another arm of government?
I think people get quite confused about Family Planning Queensland. I think I need to say that we're a non-government organisation and we're not a department. And so a lot of the time, even people within the department may not know that. And so they would assume that we are funded to work with children and young people in care. Our health funding at the moment enables us to support some young people who are at risk, and what we try and do with that is actually support professionals and carers who are supporting young people at risk. So some of that money we can use in that way, particularly with regards to a work that we do around sexual behaviours called Traffic Lights Framework.
We'll come back, Ms Brennan, to the detail of the services you provide. If I can turn to you, Ms Allen, you work for the Victorian Department of Health and Human Services, Victoria.
That's correct.
Is that department responsible for child protection matters in Victoria?
It is.
What does the department do in respect of children in out-of-home care? What's its responsibilities?
So, in particular, the child protection area is responsible for receiving, investigating reports, taking matters to court, and where the Children's Court determines that a child is in need of protection and can no longer remain with their family, then the child is placed in out-of-home care. The department, specifically in those situations, is responsible for placing the child in the most appropriate placement that's available, so assessing and taking decisions in relation to those placement options, funding and regulating and monitoring the out-of-home care providers that provide placements for children, and continuing in all instances to either case manage children in out-of-home care or to oversee the case management arrangements where they're contracted to community service organisations. But in the main, in all instances, the Secretary of the Department retains the duty of care to ensure that the child's health, wellbeing and development is maintained while they're in out-of-home care.
Who has parental responsibility for children in out-of-home care?
That can vary. So in Victoria, under the current legislation, parental responsibility is defined as either a parent having, or the state having custody or guardianship of a child. And so, subject to the particular children's court order that the child is placed on, custody and guardianship will either be retained by the parent or by the secretary. So it could be a combination for any given child in out-of-home care. Their parent could retain parental responsibility, or the state may have that.
Is it the case in Victoria that most children who are living in out-of-home care are in placements organised by the non-government sector?
That's correct. Most of the, almost all, but not quite all, out-of-home care services are delivered by community service organisations.
Does the department retain a case management role in respect of children who are managed by those community service organisations?
There's an option to either retain case management, or where it's felt that it's in the best interest of the child for the community service organisation to offer case management, then that can be contracted to them. Where that occurs, however, is it's still required that the department retains case planning responsibility and some level of obligation to continue to visit the child and oversee their circumstances.
So in practice, the case planning responsibility involves providing a plan or reviewing a plan annually?
That's correct, at least annually or whenever the circumstances of the child change.
How would you know if the circumstances of the child changed?
Essentially how it's operationalised is that the Child Protection Program retains teams of practitioners that liaise on a daily basis with the contracted case manager. They have visibility of their case notes, they speak regularly, they're members of care teams, and so they would be regularly discussing and communicating about the child's circumstances. And if ever there's a need to change the case plan or the child's placement, or there's been a significant variation in the child's circumstances, then a new case plan can be considered or a review of decisions undertaken.
How many children are in out-of-home care in Victoria?
There's approximately 7,700 children in out-of-home care.
How many practitioners do you have in the department?
There's just over 1,300 practitioners.
And those 1,300 practitioners have responsibility for 2 or so children? Is that how it works?
No, the 1,300 children would be dispersed across different aspects of the Child Protection Program. So many would be in an intake function where they're receiving calls. Others are responsible for investigations.
So
However,
just in terms of the daily contact you referred to, the information that the Royal Commission has heard to date is that children are visited by the state agency on a relatively infrequent basis. Your evidence is that there's, I think, daily contact. How does that happen in practice?
So typically for children who are in out-of-home care, those children would either be managed by the Child Protection Program and typically the child protection practitioners would have approximately 8 families that they would be responsible for, and of which some of those children could be in out-of-home care. If the case is contracted, however, it's specific staff that would be responsible generally for a portfolio concerning an agency, so there may be one practitioner who's responsible for all of the children in their area, who might be contracted to MacKillop Family Services as one example. And typically they would oversee 30 to 40 children who might be contracted to that agency.
But you're not suggesting they'd have daily contact with those children?
No, they have daily contact with the contracted case manager from the agency, or as required. So they would be in close communication with the case manager.
It's the daily contact that I'm struggling with, Ms Allen. I understand you're saying it's with the agency.
That's right.
That's contracted to provide the services.
Yes.
Is it the case that they have daily contact with those agencies?
It would vary depending on the child, but they could certainly be having daily contact for the vast majority of children on their caseload. Typically that would be phone contact, talking about how the child is going, or having visibility of the case record.
When you say having visibility, they're able to read it when they want to?
That's right.
Just going back to what the department retains.
Sorry, is that what you're meaning by daily contact, Ms Allen?
It would be daily contact.
That an entry is being made in the electronic file of that child or young person, and if the worker wished to, the worker could access the file. Is that what you mean by daily contact?
That would be part of it, in addition to being able to regularly communicate by phone with the contracted case manager from the community service organisation. So it would be a combination of different forms of communication subject to what's needed for that individual child and how active their case is at any point in time.
So I'm trying to understand what the residual responsibility is of the state when a child is in a placement managed by and case managed by a community service organisation. And there's a case planning responsibility, which means an annual or so review of the plan for the child. And there is a capacity to review the child's report or the child's file electronically, and a capacity to speak with the community service organisation that's managing the child. Is that right?
All of those things are correct. In addition, what we'd say is that despite a case being contracted to a community service organisation, the Secretary has a non-delegatable duty of care.
Is there a case at all where the head of the community service organisation would have parental responsibility for a child placed with that organisation?
No, there's not.
Never happens?
No.
It only stays with the minister or the secretary or the parent?
That's correct, unless by... that is correct, yes.
Now, in terms of providing services in relation to children who may be at risk of or have been sexually abused in out-of-home care, what does the department do?
Who have been abused specifically in out-of-home care?
Yes.
So there's fundamentally a requirement that in all instances that an allegation is made by either the child or any person concerning a child in out-of-home care, a Category 1 incident report is completed, and there's then a requirement for what we term a quality of care investigation to be undertaken. And so in each instance, a quality of care coordinator is appointed to oversee that investigation that is undertaken by specific child protection staff, and in cases of physical or sexual abuse with the police. All matters must be referred to Victoria Police when it involves sexual or physical abuse. Those investigations are undertaken and overseen by the coordinator, and they may or may not result in a decision to substantiate the allegation of abuse. At the time the allegation is made, the incident report prompts the reporting officers and those involved with the child's case manager to consider what supports are needed for the child immediately to ensure their immediate safety, but also that any therapeutic services are required. So typically the incident report would prompt the worker to report the matter to Child Protection and consider in Victoria a referral to our Centres for Sexual Assault.
Which are funded by either the Department of Health or your department is the Department of Health as well, isn't it? Yes. So your department funds those services and would refer children in need to those services.
That's correct. Or any other mental health service that might be considered appropriate.
What oversight bodies regulate or direct your work?
In Victoria, specific oversight bodies would include the Ombudsman, obviously. We also have a very active children's court within the Victorian context, where we are required to return most matters to court every 12 months or if not every 2 years. We also have an independent commissioner for children and young people, and our VCAT system is also available for parents as a right of appeal also.
Do carers have a right of appeal to VCAT?
They do when they're considered, when a decision has been taken and the carer is considered to be impacted by that decision.
Does the Auditor General have any power in relation to your agency?
Yes, so the Victorian Auditor General regularly reviews and oversees the operations of the department and has in recent times undertaken a number of reviews.
Has there recently been established in Victoria a Commissioner for Aboriginal children and young people?
There has.
What was the reason for that position being established?
So in 2012, when the Commissioner for Children and Young People was established as an independent body of government, it was determined that there would be a principal commissioner legislated for, in addition to the capacity to appoint additional commissioners as required by government. At that time, government determined that given the overrepresentation of Aboriginal children in the out-of-home care system, that it would be of assistance to appoint an assistant commissioner in relation to Aboriginal children to oversee the services that they receive within out-of-home care, in addition to being able for that commissioner, with the endorsement of the principal commissioner, to undertake inquiries where that was necessary.
So their role is only in relation to Aboriginal children in out-of-home care?
No, they actually have broader powers than out-of-home care. They can inquire into matters concerning children involved with child protection, with the youth justice system, and vulnerable children who receive services either from family services, mental health, drug and alcohol services. So any services fundamentally that are funded by the department.
Thank you. Ms Worth.
Yes.
You're with the South Eastern Centre Against Sexual Assault.
That's right.
What services do you provide for children in out-of-home care?
We have a sexual assault service, a 24-hour one, so we see about 3,000 new people a year, 1,000 of them are children. I couldn't actually tell you the exact percentage that are in out-of-home care, but most of them would have difficulties that have probably led to them being in out-of-home care. We provide counselling, groups, and in addition we provide a sexually abusive treatment service for a number of children, most of whom are in out-of-home care. We provide therapy. We see families, we see carers, we see parents. We're basically quite inclusive, so we see just about anyone who's been affected by the situation.
And you're funded by Miss Allen's department?
We are.
Solely funded?
Yes, we are now solely funded. We have some money from philanthropics, but basically that's not recurrent.
The 3,000 new people a year you see, do you have people who are ongoing on your books, as it were, for receiving services?
Yes, we do. We don't actually have a limit on the number of sessions we provide, and that's for adults and children. So we can see people for a number of years if we need to.
So at any given time you'd have more than 3,000 people who you were providing services to?
We would. There were 60 staff.
And more than 1,000 of those would be children?
That's actually accurate, yes.
And you can't tell us what percentage of those might be in out-of-home care, but can you give some indication as to whether it would be some, many, most?
It would probably be well over half, because we have a lot of referrals directly from Child Protection, Child First and Disability Services, and also the NGOs who've got children in care refer to us.
So you can take referrals from people other than state agencies?
Yes.
Is there any restriction on who can come to you?
Almost none.
Does anyone have to pay?
No.
Thank you. Mr Tolliday, you're with New Street Adolescent Service Program.
That's correct.
What does that program do?
New Street Services are therapeutic programs located in New South Wales health districts, in 3 districts at the moment, for children and young people aged 10 to 17 who've sexually harmed others.
Other children?
Other children generally, but may also have harmed adults.
And how do people come to your program?
The referral pathway is open to people from any source or any place. A threshold requirement is that there's been a report made about the behaviour, that it's been investigated and confirmed, and that a decision has been made to not charge the child or young person with a criminal offence, because there's a pathway into juvenile justice for those young people. The vast majority of young people with sexually harmful behaviours are not charged with offences, and which is the reason why health moved into this space.
So is it the case that if a report was made to the Child Protection Agency that a child is at risk of harm because they have been in sexually abusing other children, that would come to your attention?
Yes.
Is it the case that risk of harm reports can be made about a child who is harming somebody else rather than the traditional case of is at risk of harm from others?
Yes.
So it's the report would be the same?
Would be the same. Generally, the reports that relate to the young people that come to New Street are in relation to the harm caused to another young person. So that the young person, for New Street's purposes, is identified as a person of interest in those reports.
You say that it has to have been substantiated. It's my language, not yours. Is that by the Child Protection Agency or by the police?
It's broader than that. It may be by the Child Protection Agency or police. That would certainly meet our threshold. Sometimes it's not substantiated, or we use the word confirmed. But if the young person themselves confirm the behaviour, or their parents or carers confirm the behaviour, if it doesn't reach a statutory threshold or an investigative threshold, the confirmation by the carers or the child themselves or their family is sufficient.
Do they stay with you, with your program, for a defined period of time?
No, the period of time young people and their families and carers are worked with depends upon the needs of the child or young person. It averages somewhere approaching 2 years, not of the same intensity through the whole of the 2 years, but it's about a 2-year period of time we're engaged with each young person.
Is there any relationship between how they proceed through your program and whether any criminal charges are ultimately preferred?
There may be. Generally, where there's been an investigation, there's been a decision made not to proceed in that manner for the matters that are known at that time. So part of the initial assessment process is to ensure that the reasons for that decision are conveyed to the child and their carers or family. And the anticipation we have is that we just proceed with addressing those behaviours. If further behaviours or further behaviour is identified either from an earlier time or during the time that we're seeing the young person, we make reports about those behaviours, and those behaviours may become subject to criminal prosecution.
When you say you make reports, is that to Child Protection and Police, or just Child
It's
Protection?
to a single point. It's to the helpline where a joint investigative response may follow if it reaches the threshold of risk of serious harm.
Do you form a view when the program is complete with the child whether or not it's been successful?
Yes.
And
How do we do that?
what happens as a result of forming that view?
Well, as a result of forming that view, of course, our contact with the child and family finishes. We anticipate that the young person is in a position of safety, it's being cared for adequately. Ideally, we would like that young person to be on track developmentally to their capacity in all aspects of their life, and they do not pose a further risk to other children and young people.
Do you consider you have any responsibility to allow the child or young person, if they are, by the time they've completed your program, to leave your program without follow-up?
The latter phase of our program is a less intensive phase that's really a follow-up phase in itself. We have a point of completion of the core part of the program, but there's a further period of following up with the young person and their carers for a number of months after that as a maintenance. But there's not an indefinite or a longer-term follow-up from our program.
Is it residential?
No, it's not residential.
You have obviously more than one child involved in the program at one time.
Yes.
Do they meet together? Is that part of the treatment?
No, we have done some elements of group work in the past. Group work generally for young males is generally not indicated for this behaviour. We have started doing some small group work with girls, and that seems to be very positive for girls in pairs or groups of 2 or 3. There's a critical mass issue of need to have enough girls of a similar developmental stage to be able to have some time together.
What is the work that you do with these children and young people?
The work involves an initial assessment of the behaviours, the child's care situation, to look into the history of the child, to, if you like, interrogate the history, anticipating a likelihood, though it's not in all cases, but a likelihood that the child has experienced some form of child abuse trauma or developmental interruption. In understanding that behaviour, we are hoping that the child, together with their carers or parents, can acknowledge the behaviour, that the child can address the behaviour in ways that are appropriate to their developmental stage.
Have you been able to form any view as to the numbers of children and young people who you see who clinically you believe, or by admission you believe, have been the subject of child sexual abuse?
Yes, it's somewhere in the vicinity of between 30 and 40%.
And that child sexual abuse could have occurred familiarly or in some other place?
More likely familiarly.
What about children who are or were in out-of-home care? Are you able to give us any assistance as to that?
Not at the moment. We could probably draw some data about that. In relation to the children out of home care, when we did one review of outcomes of a cohort up to the year 2004, we had a quarter of the children in our service in out of home care. The proportion's now about a half. So we've got a growing proportion of participation in our program by children who are in some form of out of home care. Their experience of sexual harm or of sexually harming in out-of-home care, if we drew a statistic from our cohort, it would only be relevant to our cohort. And one of the issues with data is we need something that's got a broader base to get a clearer picture about the incidents in out-of-home care.
But what do you think from the cohort that you have access to?
I would need to break it down, because our cohort, we have children and young people who have come into out-of-home care for other reasons, and we have children and young people who come into out-of-home care because of sexually harming behaviour. We have children and young people who've sexually harmed others before they've come into care and after, so that all of those things would need to be broken down differently. In terms of the experience, or our experience, of children who've harmed others whilst in out-of-home care, it's clearly a more significant issue for children in the resi care end of the spectrum.
So what form of treatment do you use for the boys? You've talked about the girls being able to participate in some small group work. What about the boys?
Well, the approach is generally through a holistic and family and developmental framework of looking at not just the behaviour, but the young person in the context of their overall life, their family, whether they're living with their family or not at the time we meet with them. We engage with their immediate carers. If they're in out-of-home care, we will always seek information and, in the vast majority of cases, make contact with the family from which the children have been moved and seek to identify if there are any residual issues or any developments in that family of origin.
Do you have any difficulty getting access to that information?
Sometimes. But it's fairly unusual currently because we have an information exchange system in New South Wales where we can call on the Department of Community Services to provide relevant material. We need to be very clear why we need that and then the use we're going to use that for.
The basis for the treatment that you provide, is it in research or some other evidentiary base?
We regard the treatment approach as being evidence-based. From the outset, we had a holistic framework of family and restorative practices that was not well evidenced in the 1990s. It is well evidenced now as a preferred way of working with children and young people. It's a trauma-informed approach. We're working to assist young people and the people around these young people to help them process the trauma that they've experienced and understand and recognise that, to understand their own internal processes, the things that may trigger the behaviour and interrupt any behaviour that may harm themselves or others.
Mr. Tolliday, what about the issue of disclosures during your interaction with the child or young person who's been disclosing sexually abusive behaviour? That's been a controversial issue in the past in the delivery of programs.
Yes, at the outset, our engagement with children and young people and their carers is on a base of limited confidentiality, and in the induction stage or the pre-assessment stage of the process, we work this through in detail with children, young people and their carers in order that they understand that if they make further disclosures that relate to the safety and well-being of others or of themselves, that we will make reports about that and engage with the system more broadly. The most frequent reports that we make actually are in relation to the safety of the young people themselves.
In terms of self-harm?
No, in terms of harm that's been caused to them previously or harm that they are living with currently.
Does your program operate the same way, Ms. Worth, on those same principles?
In terms of disclosures?
Yes.
Yes, if people disclose more information about the actual offence or the reason they're actually in the program, then we would keep that information within the program. If they talk about a totally different incident, then we would actually pass that information on to Child Protection and to the police.
Do you do that on the basis that you assume that the information about the actual offence or the reason they're there is known to others?
Yes, and it usually is known to others. Most of our referrals would come through the police or DHS. Occasionally they come through families themselves, but mostly there have been statutory bodies involved.
Just going back to you finally, Mr. Tolliday, has your New Street program been evaluated?
Yes, it has. There have been 3 evaluations. The first evaluation was in the early stages of startup. It was conducted by Professor Tony Vincent, an evaluation of the systems we put in place and some interviews with young people and families. The second was a study looking at outcomes for children in our service. 50 young people who received a service at the Sydney New Street service were matched with 50 young people who were referred but unable to receive a service due to capacity at the program. And in 2014, an evaluation was completed as part of the Keep Them Safe process by KPMG of the New Street program overall.
What was the result of that most recent evaluation?
It was an endorsement of the approach taken and the promising outcomes. I say promising because we've been establishing and rolling out new services. We're rolling one out at the moment in the Illawarra as a fourth service, and we need quite a long period of follow-up to be able to evaluate specifically the impact of the programs.
But the evaluations that have been conducted to date are positive in the terms of how you do it and the results from what you do.
Yes.
As a result of those positive evaluations, the most recent and Professor Vincent's, has there been any more funds provided so that your services can be provided elsewhere?
Not since the most recent evaluation, though some work has been completed within New South Wales Health's Kids and Families to do a demand modelling of the state to look at where future services, if funds are identified, might best be situated.
Is there any geographical spread to those who come to you? Are the children, predominantly from metropolitan, rural, remote, regional areas?
The services to date have been established based on needs identified through a number of inquiries and processes. So the first service was based in Sydney, the largest population base in New South Wales, so clearly the largest demand is here in this city. The next service came about as a government response to the Aboriginal Child Sexual Assault Task Force, and it was established through a base in Tamworth. The next range of services were established through the Keep Them Safe initiatives, looking at data that was gathered through the joint investigations of reports of child abuse in New South Wales. So those services were set up in Newcastle, another major city and population base, and at Dubbo, covering a geographical area of 1/3 of the state almost. And the Illawarra and Shoalhaven is the next largest population base, particularly of young people.
Do you find that Aboriginal children are disproportionately represented in the work you do?
They are now, which is pleasing because they are disproportionately represented in all of the child protection data. They were underrepresented initially, and we presented some of our strategies and results to the Aboriginal Child Sexual Assault Task Force, and have engaged in a process of developing more culturally appropriate and culturally safe ways of responding. That has included the development of an Aboriginal clinical workforce, which numbers 7 positions at the moment. The establishment of those positions, in addition to the clinical program changes, have led to an enormous increase in participation by Aboriginal children and families, which is pleasing because we believe that represents the reality of the difficulties for Aboriginal children in this space.
Thank you. Ms Worth, the work that you do, is it based on a similar model to the one described by Mr Tolliday?
It's a very similar model. We run slightly more groups. We have 120 targets, so in fact we often have quite a number of young people. Usually we see people one-on-one, we see their families, we're involved with their schools, their carers, anybody else who's involved with them. We do occasionally run groups, and we have an adventure program which is basically high wires and so on to challenge them and get them to challenge themselves, which is once a month.
Do you see any difference between children who are in out-of-home care and the responsiveness to the treatment you provide from children who aren't in out-of-home care but who have suffered sexual abuse?
I think one of the difficulties with out-of-home care and for the children and for people working with them is there's an uncertainty with it, and often there are far more changes in where they're placed than there should be. So they often have attachment problems, or they're not sure where they'll be next, or they behave very badly and then they end up in a different placement. So that's an added complication when you've already got children who are displaying some behaviours that require some stability for us to deal with.
Any solutions you can offer to that?
There probably are solutions. I mean, I think it comes down to you need to employ much more qualified staff. You need to try and maintain staff, retain staff, so you don't have a turnover. We have a very stable staffing group. We've had a lot of people. I've been there 23 years. Many of the workers have been there 15 to 20 years. So you can give a child the same therapist for a number of years. And I think stability is basically what's required in these situations. There's no point in having a new worker every 6 months, 12 months. These children have had a lot of changes in their life.
The children you see who have been sexually abused in out-of-home care, are those children generally coming to you with their current carer or with some other person, assuming that have to come accompanied because of their age?
They probably both. Sometimes they have gone back to their families. The department's been working when they've gone back with their families, who are often very cross by that stage because they've had them quite often taken away because of violence, and then they've had a child sexually abused. So they come with both carers and with, in fact, their family members.
And if it's the family to whom they've been restored after having been removed and abused in care, do you then work with the family as a whole?
Yes, we do.
What sort of outcomes have you found from the work you do with children, particularly those sexually abused in out-of-home care?
Look, if they have a stable placement, then we achieve some reasonable outcomes for them, because often we're dealing with very basic things, that they're not sleeping, they're running away, they've been exploited, in fact, by groups of people who've been pimping young kids around. We can sometimes stabilise some of those children. It's not easy. In fact, in some ways, damage has already been done, and it's about starting much earlier with families and putting a lot of supports in to try and assist them, and if you can't, probably going on to permanency planning. So we sort of end up at the pointy end sometimes, trying to put band-aids on things.
Have there been any evaluations of the work that you do?
There have been evaluations in the past of some of it. Of the overall service, no, because there were so many components. Of the sexual abuse treatment services, there was an evaluation, oddly enough, of the 15 to 17-year-old component, probably about 4 or 5, 6 years ago. And was found to be effective, but it was a very small number of placements at that stage. It was really because it sat with the Department of Justice back then. Should they keep funding it? Well, they passed the money to the Department of Human Services eventually. So.
Are there any particularly new or innovative approaches that your centre has adopted towards children who have been abused or with abusive behaviours over the last few years?
We've been working with a group of young women who had actually been sexually exploited, is the word being used. And what I'd done was extracted an agreement from workers that they would be around for at least 2 years, and then one of them got pregnant, so you can never achieve everything you're after, but that they would be around for a couple of years and they would work with these young people, basically almost in any format that they needed to. So they spend a lot of time SMSing them, a lot of time sending stuff on Facebook, a lot of time meeting them in places that suit the young people. And that's actually, for a number of young women, at least given them somebody they could trust and attach to. And the department too in Victoria had actually placed workers with the police in one specific region, and they had been operating a very similar process. So that has appeared to work because they're a very difficult group to engage.
Any other initiatives?
We have a large social media presence because we found that was, in fact, something that a certain age group responded to better. We've also got a sexual assault reporting anonymously, mobile-friendly. I don't know the word for it. It used to be an app, but now it's a mobile-friendly website, and we get a large number of reports on that.
Still an app?
I don't think it's an app anymore, so those who know tell me. But anyway, and we get a large number of anonymous reports on that, and then some of them actually will put a phone number saying, I'd like to be contacted. So we found that really quite useful. And some of them have reported very serious intrafamilial assaults that I don't think they've ever reported anywhere else, because those sort of approaches, social media, are what they use very comfortably.
When you say they've reported anonymously, I take it you mean that they have not told you their name?
Well, it's an anonymous, you can report anonymously, and at the very end we put a little button which said, if you'd like to be contacted, leave your mobile and name. And they go through the whole anonymous process, and then a number of people put their phone number and name.
But if they don't...
These are children and young people,
yes,
under 18s.
Yes, quite a number of them, and some are adults too, obviously, but it's been surprisingly successful.
If they don't give you their name and a contact number, or even just a contact number, what can you do with that information?
We now have a system with the police where we pass that information on. We then delete our stuff because we get worried someone will subpoena everything. But we pass the information on to actually intelligence officers in most states and territories. They then put the information about the mode of operation, basically, of the person who offended against them, into their database. And about a month, 2 months ago, they actually did arrest somebody by having added 2 reports that we had sent them to some other information they got, which gave them enough additional information, to go ahead and talk to the person they wanted to interview. So that's been a very interesting, innovative process for us, whereas we just thought it would just be something useful as opposed to really quite effective.
With Family Planning Queensland, what have you found and used as new initiatives in this area?
So a lot of the work that I can talk about is really from that educational framework. So I think the thing that we're finding really useful, and the thing that I would really like to talk about, is that we're from a really big state. There aren't a lot of therapeutic services. I mean, they're incredibly rare, and also therapeutic services that feel that they really are on top of what they're doing, particularly with problem sexual behaviours and abusive sexual behaviours.
Just let me stop you there and explain what you mean by therapeutic services.
So counselling services. So
is it limited to counselling? Is that what that means?
Yes, and I mean we have a forensic service that works with young offenders as well, but it's very hard to get children and young people who have problem sexual behaviours or abusive sexual behaviours into services that are set up to do that work in Queensland. It's only really the last few years that therapeutic or counselling services even have existed in this space. So we've been doing this work for over 20 years at Family Planning, but not from a therapeutic point of view, from an educational point of view. So because a lot of the children and young people, they're actually not supported by a counsellor. They're supported by family, they're supported by a teacher, they're supported by a youth worker, they're supported in different ways. And so what we have been trying to do is actually broaden an approach of looking at children and young people and their sexuality and what sexual development means, and trying to help young people and the people who care for them have a greater understanding about what kind of supportive practices or protective practices they can put around young people.
How do you do that for children and young people in out-of-home care?
There's many ways to do it. So some of that may be about, working with the department and the department staff. I find it's actually quite unusual the number of people that go into caring for children and young people, whether they be foster and kinship carers or whether they be, professionals from social work or psychology. How few of them actually have a solid background in understanding sexuality and sexual development, let alone issues around trauma and sexual development. So whilst, it's fairly common that we're working with children and young people who have experienced sexual abuse and then young people who may have problem or abusive sexual behaviours, there's very few staff that have a really good base framework, even around what is expected sexual development for children at that time, let alone those who have been impacted by trauma. So we really try and work with staff and carers and adults in children's world, try and use a systems approach to looking at what you can do to support children and young people. So whilst some young people may be lucky enough to access therapeutic services, most don't. So what we're trying to do is look at, well, how can you support those children with the people who are actually in their lives? Because there's so much stuff you can do to help stabilise and look after and protect young people without them having to go and see a specialist, once every 2 weeks, especially if that specialist doesn't even exist.
I don't quite understand how you access children who are in out-of-home care, particularly in relation to providing education about protective behaviours and sex education, when they are scattered in different foster care arrangements or different kinship arrangements, either operated by the state or some NGO.
That's right. So it's actually the point that if these children and young people are scattered, and if these children and young people are mobile and transient, then actually who are the people who aren't? And it's the workforce, and it's also often the foster and kinship carers. So what we're trying to do is actually put in place, some base education.
But when you say put in place, this is what I'm missing.
Oh, okay. So we run training.
But how do I understand you run training?
Webinars and...
I understand you do that.
Okay.
How does Sophie, who's living in Rockhampton, who's not had access to any of this, and Sophie's carers don't know anything about it, how do those people know about you, and how are they able to access your training?
So what will happen is that we, at different times, so I've been at family planning for 20 years, at different times have got short pilot projects to be able to do training for different child safety officers or foster and kinship carer services. Or places in Rockhampton or Wide Bay will employ us to come and do training with all of their staff and provide resourcing for all of their staff. We have, websites that give our information and give our resources. What we're trying to do is basically teach and help people to understand sexual behaviours and to be able to respond to sexual behaviours in daily active ways of communicating with children, so that even when you do have children that have moved into problem sexual behaviours, there's a lot that you can do. So yeah, the people in Rockhampton find us maybe because it's a crisis and they accidentally do, but maybe because their local child safety office knows about the work that we do and they assist them to find us so that we can do training with them. So it's really hard to go, well, this is the one way we see people, because sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes they're on a webinar, sometimes they come to training, and every few years we get small bits of funding so that we can work with different groups and build larger projects or programs. I mean, we write resources so that people can do this work themselves and have support.
Now, this may be a function of my age, Ms Brennan, but I think of family planning as about contraception and the like. I take it others see family planning as broader than that.
I hope so. Yes. So yes, traditionally family planning services were thought of as being, contraception, safe sex, those kind of services. particularly in Queensland, though, and in other services around Australia, but particularly in Queensland, we've been recognised for the work that we do with regards to sexual development, understanding what could be considered normal sexual development that might be of concern, and then behaviours that may be, abusive or problem sexual behaviours. So whilst we've come from a place that is about contraception and safe sex, we know that the children and young people and the professionals that we work with, they can go to the doctor or the chemist. They actually require somebody who has expertise and a working knowledge of how do you support young people, negotiate issues like pornography or prevent sexual abuse. So yes, in Queensland in particular, we've developed years of expertise in prevention of sexual abuse and in looking at responses to problem sexual behaviours. Apart from our sexual assault service in Cairns, though, we have done that more from an educational point of view rather than a therapeutic point of view like the other people who are sitting here with us.
And you're confident from the work that you get and the referrals that are made to you that Queenslanders know what you do too?
Yes. Look, there'll be a lot of people who accidentally stumble upon us because we're Family Planning Queensland, and it doesn't actually make sense to them that there's these people who are doing this research and this investigation. Last week I was lucky enough to be in the Northern Territory working with the Education Department. The traffic light system is actually, been translated into Swedish and into Norwegian. So it's actually, and it's being used across the UK as a safeguarding mechanism that's been put into child protection systems in the UK.
Tell us about the traffic light system.
So, it's really simple and it's not a diagnostic tool. It's actually, so for many years I've been working at Family Planning Queensland. We were getting referrals from child safety services and from disability services with children who had problem sexual behaviours. I went out there trying to find support to be able to work with children with problem sexual behaviours, and almost all of the training that I could go to was about adolescent sexual offenders or adolescents who had problem sexual behaviours. Very little of it started at the beginning of looking, well, what is normal sexual development and then what's happened along the way. So it's a really simple model that's based on research from around the world that basically looks at age and stage development of what is considered to be age-appropriate sexual development, and then how do you know when it's not. Because most children aren't going to, even if they're in care, see a specialist or be able to work with someone who can give them long-term support in this area. It's more of a, an educational support care advice, so that a foster or kinship carer can have ongoing conversations, can do ongoing things in a house to make it safer for someone to live there. It's probably a far more, down to earth approach, which is used by all of the people who are also doing therapeutic work, I say as well. They're not just doing therapy because there's no such thing if you're working with a child or young person. But what it does is it basically breaks it down to ask everybody who is looking after a child or a young person to be involved in their healthy sexual development. Before we started doing this work, it's often that anything with the word sexuality or sexual behaviour or sexual abuse, it was, well, refer them out. There's got to be some specialist. Someone else does this work. And what we're saying and asking people to do is realise that most of the work can be done within the system that already exists by the people who already work there. They have the skills. They just need the support to be able to do that. And then, of course, when you're getting to the pointy end, where people really do require more support and therapeutic approach, then we need to be funding those services as well. So yeah, we're trying to look at baseline, universal, secondary level rather than the tertiary level. And I know that sounds strange within child protection, which is seen as tertiary in itself, but I think we need to recognise that even children and young people who have problem sexual behaviours or have experienced sexual abuse, exploitation, or working in sex work, there's still normal sexual development issues going on, and it's all getting tied together in a complicated way, and people aren't separating that out.
Just turning to a different topic, Ms Brennan, what do you tell your staff who are interacting with children and young people about what to do if a child or young person discloses sexual abuse, particularly a child in out-of-home care?
Yes, so we have very thorough procedures around disclosure that we would, report to our line management and then follow the relevant procedures. So it depends on what service we're in when that child who is in out-of-home care talks to us. Because we work in schools, we work in disability services, we work with all young people across all of the services that they exist in. So we have to have not only our own policy and procedures around responding to disclosures, but also a very good working knowledge about what the procedures are within that institution. So if we're at a school, we know how to follow up. If we're actually working with the child safety service, we're also involved with their procedure.
So if you're working with the school and the child's at the school and it's in that context you're providing the training or education,
yeah,
and the child discloses to your worker, are you saying that your worker deals firstly with the school?
Yes. And
tells the school about the disclosure?
Yes, within the policy and the procedures of whether or not it's a Department of Education school, an independent school, or a Catholic education school. But yes, it's we would always if we are working.
Sorry, does that mean there are variations?
There's slight variations. They're very minor. They all basically say though that you would follow up and you would talk to the relevant authority in that school, and then we would follow up again with our own procedures, so that would report would come to our general manager, and then we would go further and look at whether or not we ourselves would then go to child protection, or ourselves would also go to police. But a lot of the time we would be trying to facilitate the service where that child has the most contact, to be able to follow that process and procedure that they're in.
Why?
If we feel...
Why wouldn't you take the obligation on yourself if the disclosure was made to you, regardless what other agencies might do and regardless of who else you told in terms of the context of the child? Why wouldn't you take the obligation on yourself to go to child protection or police?
Well, it depends on the context. If it's a one-on-one context where it's happening directly with us in that situation, definitely we would do that. If it's in a group context where that child and young person is actually going to be getting more long-term support and care from within that system. But if we feel so what we would do is we would follow up, make sure that that's been done, but we would be trying to put it through one agency.
Let me just be more specific, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
Again, let's come back to the school. If it's a disclosure that was made during the course of a group session at the school, and your staff member was facilitating that session or providing that session, what do your procedures tell that person to do with that disclosure? And it's a state school.
To go to the principal.
To tell the principal?
Yeah.
Anything else?
After the principal, that's when they would then contact the general manager, and then the general manager will follow up with the principal and then with the department. If we feel that...
Which department?
Child safety. And then after that, if we feel that we haven't received adequate information about something being done, we would then go to the commission.
What would you expect the principal to do?
We would expect the principal to do contact, well, depending on what the issue is, whether or not they would go straight to the Department of Child Safety, or whether or not they would also involve the police.
Well, it's an allegation of child sexual abuse, so it's therefore a criminal offence.
Yes, it is, and so they would be following their process. So normally they would go straight to the Department of Child Safety, and with the Department of Child Safety together, the police would be involved. It's just to make it streamlined, so that there's not a lot of people contacting for one issue.
Have you had discussions with the Department of Child Safety about your approach in these cases?
Yes, we have. They've looked at our paper. We base our procedures on theirs, and we've had it all looked at to make sure that it's appropriate.
And do you understand that if a report goes to the Department of Child Safety, the police are automatically involved?
Yes.
And if you report it to the principal in the manner you've described, and you report to your general manager, what does your organisation do about whether or not the principal has taken it further?
We follow up.
By that you mean you ring the principal?
Yeah, we ring the principal to follow up the procedures, and we look at what's occurred at the school and you know, make sure that we follow through to make sure that something's been done with that. But I mean, that's the way that the child safety, what they are asking us to do is try and have one point of contact rather than several.
Well,
yes, if the principal hasn't reported, I understand that that can be an issue, but we would then report. If we felt in any way that they hadn't, then we ourselves would be reporting. All of our staff are also able to report at any time along the way should they wish to, as is our general manager. So we all also have the discretion to report if we feel that we need to as well.
Are your staff mandatory reporters?
No.
But the principal is?
Yes.
And you'd expect the principal to fulfil his or
do
her
their
obligation?
Job. Yes, that would be our expectation, but I understand the world isn't perfect. But yes, that would absolutely be our expectation.
Would you feel that it was necessary for you to obtain the consent, bearing in mind the age of the child, to taking that action?
So what we do as part of the way that we work, before we do any of our sessions, whether or not they be with children, young people, or adults, is actually talk about if we are hearing something that could mean that you are at risk of harm or you are at risk of harming someone else, that we cannot keep that to ourselves and that it is part of our job to talk to other people and to get help. And so we actually try and give people a choice in whether or not, you know, they would choose to disclose that they themselves have been harmed or at risk of harming other people. The way we do that can be quite different depending on the cognitive level of the people that we're working with, you know, whether or not they're a person with a disability, those kind of issues. If it's in group work, we would also attempt to do protective interrupting so that we can give people an option not to disclose, you know, their risk of harm or the risk of harming others in front of everybody in the room. So we would all follow those procedures.
Is it different if the child happens to be at school but the sexual abuse allegation is in relation to, or disclosures in relation to out-of-home care in terms of your procedures?
No, if we're working in a school, we won't always know that that child or young person is actually in out-of-home care. That'll often be something that we find out through the process of us following up and engaging with that child and making sure that that child or young person has received support.
If you were providing training or education to a group in Rockhampton that you know included or was largely comprised of children in out-of-home care and a disclosure was made, would your procedures say you go straight to the Department of Child Safety?
No, they wouldn't.
What do they tell you?
They would tell us to be going through the principal.
Yeah, but this has got nothing to do with the school. This is...
Sorry, we're in a group of young people
Let's go back to Rockhampton.
I'm there, okay, I can see it.
A group of foster carers or community services that provide out-of-home care services.
Oh yeah, then we would just report to the Department of Child Safety.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, thank you.
Got lost.
No, that's fine. It was complicated. Ms Allen, do you have arrangements with non-government organisations in your state as to what they should do if a child makes a disclosure so as to, as Ms Brennan has said, streamline the reports to you?
We do. So typically it would depend on, as you indicated before, whether or not people involved in the delivery of services are mandatory reporters, and obviously we would expect that they'd make a direct report. Generally speaking, we would encourage the direct reporting of the person who received the disclosure, however, wherever possible. So as part of our training, our protocols and understandings with organisations, we'd encourage direct reporting where we possibly could, on the basis that that would give us the most direct and valuable, not second-hand information.
And your system would be such that you could combine in some electronic form a number of reports about the same incident and or child?
That's correct. Subject to the type of information we had, our database might allow us to search, for example, persons responsible for harm. So if one organisation reported that Mr. Smith was responsible for the harm, we could run that name through our database to see whether he was responsible for the harm of any other children.
Now, your agency is involved with funding other bodies that provide treatment of the type that Mr. Tolliday has mentioned, and Ms. Worth. Do you provide any services to children who have been abused in out-of-home care directly?
So when you say services, obviously there's the day-to-day care that's required for all children who have been abused. And
leaving aside the statutory protection system.
No, all of the services would be funded and contracted to specialist services, therapeutic services.
How do you determine that the service that you refer children to who have been sexually abused in out-of-home care provides the right treatment for that child? And by right I mean evidence-based, and you're confident is the most appropriate service?
Ideally, what we'd be seeking for any funded services is that we are looking at the point that the funding and service agreement is entered into, that the service to be delivered is evidence-informed, is subject to the best available research. So typically we'd be looking at developing specifications for that service delivery, that we've undertaken things like literature reviews, looked at what best practice is evidenced at the time, and then ideally we'd be looking for ongoing evaluations over time that indicate success in terms of outcomes.
Having taken all of that into account, what can you tell us about what services your department believes are most effective for dealing with children who have been sexually abused in out-of-home care in order to support those children?
So what the current research would tell us is that any services that are delivered need to be both cognizant of the child's development and be developmentally informed, but they also need to be trauma-informed. So specifically for children in out-of-home care, we need to recognise that they're a very unique group, that they come with different backgrounds and different complexities to that of the general community quite often, and that the delivery and provision of service therefore needs to be tailored to their unique circumstances. So we do need to make sure that they are informed by the latest research in terms of neuropsychological development, that, as I said, they're trauma-informed, that they...
Just tell me, what does trauma-informed mean?
Essentially that they understand the impact of trauma that children have experienced throughout their lives, so that they understand the relationship between the child's, I guess, day-to-day or lived experience and how they, as individuals, have responded to and coped with the trauma of abuse and neglect that they will have received that's brought them into the out-of-home care system.
So to me as a lay person, that means that the person has to listen to the child and elicit their history in order to understand what they've been through, where they've been and who they are now.
Absolutely. So they need to be very, very conscious and deliberate about understanding their background, how they've come into the system, and typically how they've responded to their life circumstances.
But wouldn't a counsellor ordinarily do that anyway? In order to do their job, they needed to understand who the child was and what experiences they'd had?
I think typically we talk about most counsellors and therapists undertaking psychosocial histories and understanding where the children have come from. I think what's special about trauma-informed practice is that it goes a step further to really understand the interplay of and impacts of trauma on the child's brain development, their overall development and life circumstances in a way that enriches that assessment. So it's probably an overlay of what we'd typically expect for other children, but a richer and deeper understanding about how the previous trauma a child's experience is going to trigger their reaction, how they might behave differently to a child of 8, 9 years old who hasn't experienced a very difficult and abusive background.
And for those people who deliver trauma-informed services, do they need to have additional or different qualifications from the standard qualifications of, say, a psychologist or similar?
I don't think necessarily the qualifications are different, but I think should reasonably expect that they are educated appropriately and receive ongoing professional education that supports their understanding.
Sorry, let me just stop you there. When you say educated appropriately, if we're not talking about qualifications, you're talking about ongoing education as part of the continuing education program.
So we generally expect that people working in the sexually abusive area would have mandatory qualifications. It would generally be social work, psychology, and so forth, but that they would regularly seek to stay informed, to seek their own professional education so that they actually keep abreast of all of the latest research in relation to working with children of this nature.
And if you were interviewing for a position, you'd clearly look to see whether they had done that work, to see whether they were capable of providing the trauma-informed care.
I'd expect the service provider to do that, yes.
Yeah. Some witnesses have told the Royal Commission that there's a need for a special accreditation or licensing of some sort of the people that provide that care, so that those seeking their services know they're being treated by someone who has that approach. What do you think of that?
I think there's certainly, it's worthy of consideration, as is most, I think, most practitioners who work in this area. There's an argument for ongoing accreditation and or systems that both encourage and require some oversight of how people are maintaining their obligation to remain informed and to be, to be considering the latest research on any topic that they may be working within.
There's been some, I think, recent change to legislation which relates to, I think, the work that your agency does in terms of treating young offenders. Is that right? Or a different pathway for offenders in the area of sexual abuse and sexual assault to go down a treatment path rather than a juvenile justice path. Is that right?
That's right. In Victoria, we've got what's referred to as therapeutic treatment orders that have existed since for the last decade or so. That allows for reports to be made about children who are 10 to 14 who are exhibiting either problematic or sexually abusive behaviours, and allows for them to be treated outside of the criminal justice system. So in circumstances of that nature, the report would be made, an investigation about whether or not the child and family were willing to engage in treatment voluntarily, but if not, to make application to the court so that the child be directed to receive therapeutic treatment by the Children's Court by way of order.
The children who are in the care of the Secretary, are they treated differently in terms of consent to take that pathway?
No, the therapeutic treatment orders are available for both children who live at home or not subject to child protection involvement, and also those in
I understand they're available, but you spoke of the parents and the child, probably the parents given the age group, consenting to that approach, and if they don't consent, there's another pathway. Yes. Does the Secretary have a role in providing that consent if the child's in the care of the state?
Yes, they do. So typically we would be encouraging for children who are already in care who are exhibiting sexually abusive behaviours or problematic behaviours, we would be encouraging them to be involved in voluntary treatment. if they were refusing, a report could be made and we could seek the same therapeutic treatment order. So it may not be as contingent upon their parents' involvement. If they were in out-of-home care and return home was unlikely, we'd be looking at making application for an order irrespective in those circumstances.
Okay. I know the time gone.
Yes, we'll take the mid-morning break now for 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.